This is the Absolute Business Mindset podcast, created and hosted by Mark Hayward. This podcast will interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and careerists. We will delve into their journey to success, key life milestones, and go deep into their area of expertise. Get ready to learn from other successes and failures. Today, we have Maceo Jourdan, who he's described himself as the greatest marketing mind in the 20th century. Hello, Maceo. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me. So let's go and start off with your degree. So we're going to talk through your varied career in different industries: hedge fund, marketing, trading, social media, healthcare. But it all started with a physics degree. I suppose, why did you choose physics, and why did you decide not to continue a career in physics?
I love physics. I fell in love with it. I was in the States. It's called AP, so advanced placement. It's basically like college light when you're in high school, and just those experiments and finding out how to describe the world, and some of it actually goes back into some, I don't know how else to say, some childhood trauma, but also how I grew up. I come from mixed parents, so my dad's Black. My mom's was a little Jewish lady. She just recently passed, and um, I had a rough time in school just by the way I looked. In fact, one of my distinct memories in grade school is a teacher looking at me and literally saying, "I can't help you." I went under a table, was crying my eyes out. Looked over, and a little girl, kind of the quintessential blonde hair, blue eyed, walked up, asked virtually the same question. She goes, "Oh," she's smiling and helping her out. And I just remember that experience. And so, the way I describe it is, I could have gone into the realm of being put upon, right? Like something happened to me for whatever reason. I decided, well, let me decode this, is the way I would say it now. And so I figured out, okay, well, obviously, little girls get help. So I just tested things, and I finally figured out how I could get my own help. The older kids actually wouldn't help me because the teacher actually went so far as to tell the other kids not to help me. So this was not an isolated thing. The older kids, of course, I learned, followed instructions and they wouldn't help me, but the younger kids, and particularly the younger girls, would. And so that's how I, got through a lot of those situations, was just figuring out, how to hack it or figure out how I can still succeed. Um, so fast forward, all the way to physics. It was a world where that mattered less. It really was more, could you figure out the equations? Could you get the concepts right? So I think I've naturally gravitated to places where it is more possible to succeed on your merits. Now, they still may not like you because, whatever, you're Black or, Hispanic or a Jew or whatever, but at least the environment keeps that at bay. And so as I got older, I just realized where I could succeed.
So let me just stop there. So there was discrimination because of your background, because of your parents.
That's maybe another show, but it's well established in education that educators are very much biased, and it's based on whether they think the child will succeed. And yes, some of that is based on just the way the kid looks. So if you're Black, if like me, you couldn't quite tell when I was younger. I was a lot darker. Not like a Michael Jackson or anything, but my skin is definitely lightened as I've gotten older. But yeah, it's well known. It's not talked about a lot. Teachers don't like to discuss it because they think, I don't know what they think, frankly. To me, it's like, let's learn the rules of the game and figure out what the game is.
So did they think that you wouldn't be successful? Was that where it all stemmed from? That because of your background, because of what you looked like, you weren't worth investing in? You weren't worth investing their time in?
Yeah, right. So the way the studies have, I'll summarize them. I won't go into any depth, and I certainly don't want to pretend to be an expert, but basically it's that teachers have a limited amount of time, limited amount of resources. And so I totally get it. They've got to decide, you have to have some kind of heuristic, who gets help, who doesn't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because we're human, that typically resides in looks, right? So even the geometry of your face,
Yeah.
the color of your skin, the length of your hair, whether you're clean or not, those
Yeah.
are going to come into play. And it's unfortunate for sure. And so, like I said, for whatever reason, I decided something different, meaning I decided I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to, I
Right.
wouldn't let other people
Define
decide
you.
for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
as a kid, I don't think it went, as deep as that. It was probably a much more kind of visceral thing.
Mm,
So, this could get into the nature versus nurture thing, but that's
mm,
why, as an adult looking back, that's why I look back and think, oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense, that I did gravitate towards physics and direct response marketing and hedge fund trading and the special forces. It's like, yeah, okay, it makes sense. I want to succeed. And so I want to put myself someplace where it doesn't matter what you think. You're free to, someone is free to not like me because of my skin or my accent or whatever, but my performance is going to force them to give me my just due.
And did you say that you found that pretty girls helped you?
Which we don't really need to get too deep into that, but yes, I did, which of course fostered all kinds of other experiments as my testosterone level increased. I'll put it that way. So yeah, that was absolutely one of the things I remember, from that childhood.
And why did you stop pursuing a career in physics?
I was in the PhD program and they passed out, this list of potential job opportunities, and I saw $60,000 as my salary. And I thought, no. And I remember I told my advisor, so look, I'm not going to be a lab rat and work 12 years to make 60 grand a year and not be able to do what I want.
Right.
So I was already running into, in fact, I was putting forth my thesis.
Mm,
And my advisor, the dean of the physics department at ASU, both said, if it's not in the book, then you can't do it, right? Meaning
right.
your study.
Mm,
And my only answer was, guys, how the hell do you think this stuff got in the book?
mm,
Somebody's got to do some original stuff around here.
yeah.
Well, it turned out ASU had just gotten an electron microscope and they needed to pay for it. So again,
Right.
I very much just focus on what are the rules of the game. Let's not debate about what the rules are. Let's just figure out what the rules are and we'll play.
Yeah.
And so in the academic world, it really isn't about me as the researcher doing what I want. It's what has the college gotten themselves into, probably stupidly, and how are they going to pay for it? Well, they pay for it by convincing companies that their research is, at some future date going to pay off. Or in the case of government contracting, like you can get CIA, NSA
Mm,
contracts to do really esoteric stuff because they by necessity are thinking 30 or 40 years out.
yeah.
Right. So how are we going to combat the terrorists of the future that have access to crypto gear and whatnot? Well,
Yeah.
I guess we better finance, the quantum computer because we're gonna need to keep up with them speed wise.
Yeah.
But again, that's the rules of those games, right? If you really want to get the cutting edge money, much like Iron Man said, it's weapons, right? Because that's where people are going to spend for really crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So let's go make a rail gun or something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily. I wanted to get into energy. I was working on some stuff that later on became string theory. And I don't want to try and overblow my intellect, but I was definitely attracted to like the esoteric world and really figuring out the way things work. I mean, we still don't even know what electricity is. All we know is when we set up a device that we call an amp meter or a voltage meter, that the
Mm,
needle goes when you plug it into something. But that's not, you haven't described to me the nature of it. You haven't told me why, if I have a magnet swirling around a copper wire, that I can quote unquote generate electricity. And so, I really do have this insatiable curiosity and really a desire to cut through assumptions, and which of course goes back to, like I said, my childhood,
mm,
cut through assumptions and biases or even just overall mistakes and say, look, let's just figure out what things really do and work with that, not the way that things maybe are the way we want to be.
yeah. Awesome. Okay. And you mentioned that you were in the special forces, so you joined the military after your degree, or
Well,
was
hold
it?
on. I have to interrupt. So no, I never made it to the special forces.
Okay.
So I had the honor of completing the special forces assessment program.
Right. Well,
And so,
that's impressive in itself.
well, it, thank you. Yeah, it is. So, a lot of people don't make it. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
But we'll just say I wasn't their ideal candidate. I've done the Big Five personality, and I'm on two separate extremes. So I'm on the extreme for what's called politeness, which is not the please and thank you kind. It's more like automatic respect for rank or
Wow.
accomplishment or position. I've got literally zero of that. If you put 100 people in the room, I am the least likely to think your accolades are worth anything. As you can tell, I mean, look at my demeanor right now. It's like, give me a break. Which I do have to say, when it comes to royalty, it's like at an extreme. So don't get me started on that, because we just need to skip it.
Okay.
Let me bash on presidents and whatnot. Give me a chance to dig on our side. But then I'm also like at the 98th percentile for compassion. So the way I joke around about it is the reason why I'm not, a serial killer is because I'm like ultra compassionate,
Right.
which you do want soldiers to have some compassion. You don't just want guys rampaging across the battlefield, but that's just not a good mix, in an environment where you've got guns and like the freedom to use them however you want. So yeah, I made it through selection, did not get selected and move on through the training, but was very much attracted to that world because of the fact that you got by on your accomplishments. If you couldn't perform, you just don't get in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to move on to your financial career. But I think it's really interesting when doing the research and looking through the different areas that you've been into, a lot of them are quite meritocratic, like it's all on you on how you
Yep.
perform. So I think that will be a trend. So my listeners, listen out for that throughout the conversation. So one of the questions was that you went into investment in trading stocks, options, and futures. And one of
Yes.
the questions I think I'm going to get the answer to is, was this a financial choice after your physics degree and not earning enough? Was going into trading a financial choice initially?
Fortunately not.
Oh, okay.
I was working in a totally unrelated business. That was a cell phone business. So, you made the remark, I've been involved in trends before they were big. So this was back when, phones came in bags and you had to install them in cars. So it was, true to form, totally early. We were doing a trade show. And if you do a lot of trade shows, you don't habitually pick stuff up because you'd have like a garage full of it in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I was walking by this pile of videotapes they were just handing out, and it was a videotape on options trading. So picked it up, like, oh, that looks interesting. Still have no idea why. Of course, went home and actually watched it, took notes, dug in, and I was hooked right from the beginning. Options contracts, you've got multiple variables that go into the price. So there's some numbers related stuff there, but then very quickly I got the sense that you had moves in price that were outsized to the equations. So there was an intriguing factor there, like, hey, could I figure this out? And then of course you don't have to go very far in the financial realm to figure out that if you could predict the future, you could make a lot of money. Like, I think we
Yeah.
we intuit that.
Yeah.
So there was that, like, hey, if I could be the guy to figure out the markets, wouldn't that be cool? So in my hubris of youth, that was kind of the progression. I was like, wow, this looks cool, and whoa, wait a minute, there's stuff I can dig my teeth into. And then I was like, holy moly, if I can predict the future, I'm going to be a gazillionaire. Which that gets into the money. And also I thought, oh, then I could have my own lab and do my own research and give whatever a contribution I could with energy and making people's lives better.
Well, so we talked about this just before we started the recording, and I'm going to keep on referring back to this. You were early doors on implementing computerized trading.
Mm.
We're going to talk about your social media very early on, and now moved into healthcare, where we're in a pandemic where vaccines and healthcare is, and even elderly people is a
Right.
massive industry as well. So so I'm going to come back to that, but let's start with the computerized trading. So you said you did the analysis and you understood the market, or tried to understand the markets, and then there was a human element which was sort of outside of the algorithm or your idea. how did you get into the computerized side of trading rather than when I assume when it was still quite basic in the sense,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
not in the sophistication of the trading, but in the computerized side of it?
Oh, it was, Stone Age as far as the
Yeah.
computers were concerned. So I got started trading when it was all over the phone. My options trades, I had to pick up the computer. There was a little, or sorry, the phone. There was a little bit done online, but it was bad, really bad.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, all things, you're going to hear me refer back to my childhood, mostly because the way I like to say it is we wouldn't know who Bill Gates was if he was born like 5 miles to the south, right? He would have been in a different school district,
Yeah.
wouldn't have had access to the computers, and then, eventually into digital and all of that. Same thing with Steve Jobs, right? If he would have been, born in LA, he'd just
Yeah.
be some schmuck named Steve. I mean, you could argue he's still a schmuck named Steve, but that's my personality talking. So I got exposed to computers very early, TRS 80, in fact, when I was a kid. So I was used to it. I could see the power of it, not in an abstract sense, but that I'd worked with it. I could see a result on a screen at least. And I think that's a big part of it, right? You have to be comfortable with something before it even enters the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
But then also computers were being used. So for me, it was about using the computer as a tool to aggregate information, do stuff with that information, and then produce a result in the world, which would be a trade or some sort of opinion about
Mm.
the way the market was going to go.
Mm.
But then even in 98, 99, when I was really starting, to get my sea legs in trading, computers they definitely had a stronghold. So if you were on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, of course, the NASDAQ,
Yeah.
although it was still fairly new, was totally computerized. And I'd been involved in some of what's called the SOS trading, or the small order execution system back then,
What's that?
which was it was the earliest version of computerized trading,
Okay.
where you could, literally click on a screen and execute orders. Like, of course, it's ubiquitous today, but back then that was revolutionary.
Mm.
So I was involved in those early trading shops. Unfortunately, a few of those trading scams that came
Okay.
out of the SOS bandits is what they were called. So again, it wasn't all internal. Like I don't want to say like, oh, I was just some magician and came up with it. It was around, but because I was already comfortable with it and I could use it, I took off with it.
Um, were you a good trader? Did you make a lot of money?
At one point I was actually training other people, and in the States, they just changed the laws. So if you were dealing with a short-term trade, then you couldn't trade the thing personally. So I had to make a choice. Am I going to make more money trading, or am I going to make more money teaching people how to trade?
Mm.
Which, of course, we could get into that argument all day long. Like, oh, hey, if you know what you're doing, why not go trade? Well, I'll tell you, because you're going to have to move to Dallas, Chicago, or New York. You're going to have to start off by getting people coffee, and then maybe 10 years later, you're going to have enough allocation to make money. That's one career track.
Mm.
And I didn't want to spend 10 years. Or you're going to have to go raise money or get what was called an aggregator back then to give you money in order to trade. And even then, like, it was still 2 and 20, meaning you would get a 2% override on all the money for a management fee,
Mm.
and then 20% of whatever profits you had. Well, you can do some simple math and figure out, if you've got 10 million bucks, yes, you're making a lot of money, but you're still putting in the same 80-hour weeks. It's nonstop. So there are always trade-offs. There's no free lunch. And so when I did the math, I saw, okay, for what I want to do, training people is going to be more lucrative. All that backstory to say, as I was doing that, one of my guarantees was I would refund your money if in any 30-day period, the trades I gave didn't turn enough profit. Now, I have to go into a little bit of detail here. Most of the companies out there, it's an utter scam. What they'll do is they'll pick two dates. And in between those two dates, they'll say, well, you could have bought at X and sold at Y.
Mm.
That's utter bullshit. All they're doing is picking the low and the high and saying you could have bought that.
Right.
I gave entries, exits, and stop losses. It was a trading entry. And for the time that I did that, I had one person who asked for a refund. I went in and looked at the numbers and said, sorry, you just don't qualify. I said, I'll refund. I apologize. It was a double money back guarantee. And I said, look, I'll refund your money, but I'm not going to give you double because like it wasn't a losing trade. But if you're not happy, I don't want to keep your cash.
Mm.
And so by way of describing, was I good? Like, you know, doing that for 2 years and never having anybody like legitimately able to say that in any rolling 30-day period that they would have lost money on the fee that I was charging. I think that's a testament to whether or not I was skillful.
And it's interesting that you said right at the start about your sort of emotional intelligence and compassion. Was that why training was more interesting to you? And were you aware of that then? Do you think, or is it later on that you've sort of had self-reflection and sort of worked out yourself?
Well, you could imagine with those two conflicting personality traits, there's a little bit of drama. So yeah, it was absolutely. So the compassion is what drives me to want to understand my impact on other people. So with my kids, my wife, whatever, my clients. Whereas, of course, the politeness is going to say, "Ah, screw them," they don't matter. So, without question, but that understanding of where that came from actually came from listening to Jordan Peterson, and even understanding what the Big Five personality test was and having it accessible. And really, his version of that is what made my prior results more accessible to me, like how I can explain it to you.
Mm.
But like I've taken the MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is a massive test. In fact, they gave it to us as part of the Special Forces selection process. I've done that as part of my desire to be a better coach, but it's also because I realized as a trader, people say in that industry, 90% of trading is mental. I'll say 100% of trading is mental because our mental and emotional state impacts how we act.
Yeah.
Right. If for whatever reason I got enraged in this moment, I would be acting very differently than I was just 10 seconds ago.
Yeah.
So in the marketplace, you could have something that happens on the screen. You'll have an emotional response to that and get enraged, depressed, euphoric.
Yeah.
So you'd better have a handle on where your
100%.
impulses are coming from.
100%.
So it was
I think emotional intelligence is something that sadly a lot of people lack, and they don't have they don't understand themselves, and usually the knock-on effect is they don't understand other people, and are really insensitive or really lack empathy, or when people are going through difficult times. So I would say emotional intelligence is one of those things. It's kind of a superpower, because if there are so many people that just don't have that ability.
Yeah, and it's when you're talking about entrepreneurship, and this is not isolated to trading. When you're talking about anything related to money, our brains are designed to just go haywire, basically. And so, if you're involved in anything that deals with money, and you lack emotional intelligence, you have very little personal self-awareness, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Not just for the regular things that you think of, like hindsight bias and confirmation bias and things like that. But even understanding your clients, like you will wind up forcing something or projecting something onto your clients. And if you're trying to sell somebody in that environment where you're pushing something on them, and I don't mean being a pushy salesman. I mean, like you're saying, oh, I know what they want, or something of that ilk. You're going to go broke. You're going to find a few people that are going to pay you probably just enough to keep the dream alive. And then, 5 years later, when you've leveraged the house, the car, you've taken money out of the kid's college education, you're turning the key and wrapping things up and wondering like, oh, why does this keep happening to me?
So you we talked about you sort of predicting trends. Do you think you've seen trends early stage because of your financial background, or is it an analysis that you've had from physics to financial sector?
I think the only real answer is all of it, but not that all of it was necessary. Like I think I'm arrogant enough to say I think I've distilled the process down to a few key elements. And some of them will be physics-ish, where you can assign numbers to them, and others are going to be more perceptual, self-awareness, just kind of understanding the way things are. And so the first thing I'll say, it stems out of letting things just be the way they are, Mark.
Mm.
The way people miss trends is by wishing or putting something onto the situation and just not seeing, like we said, you don't see the writing on the wall.
Mm. Mm.
You've got to start with that. If you can't just see things for what they are, you will never see a trend. And that was cemented in trading. But the genesis of it was physics. And it comes from a very simple experiment. The professors put a little car on a track. The car had a pole and a ball that ran along the pole. And they said, how does the ball move? And the answer is in a curve and in a straight line.
Okay.
So it's both.
Yeah.
But what are our assumptions? Well, our brain wants to put one motion on it, right?
Mm. Mm.
It's not. So when you're going down the track, right, the car is moving across the track. If you graphed it, it would look like that, right? So it would start at the top of the pole and curve down in that, we'll call it that relative view.
Mm.
So from the outside looking in, it's curved. But if you're the ball, you fell straight down.
Yeah.
So that's what they were trying to illustrate is, well, look, there's a relativistic way of looking at this, or your description of an event is going to be relative to your observation point.
Mm.
That applies to anything.
Mm.
Your observation point determines what you think about something.
Mm.
Now, this, of course, we could be on a call for another 4 hours unpacking that. But that is truly the essence of understanding where trends come from, being able to see trends, and more importantly, being able to jump off trends that abort early. So I'll kind of cap it off with this. In the markets, the answer is yes, you really can predict the future. You can predict the way price is going to move. The problem is you never know when it's going to happen. So if somebody asks me, hey, Maceo, can you predict the future? Yeah, I just don't know when. Well, that seems kind of dumb.
It's the prime example of, are we going to go into a recession? Yes,
Yeah.
we are. But is it going to be in the first quarter or the quarter four? We just don't know,
Right.
do we? Yeah.
So now we get into, we're still in the realm of math, fortunately. So now it just comes down to risk, my friend.
Mm.
If you can design your trading system, your business, your purchasing policy, I don't care if you're arbitraging Amazon, right? So you're buying junk over in China because Americans suck that stuff up, and you're selling it, on Amazon and making a mint. Your arbitrage. It's all that is. And the arbitrage is that that person is not going to have enough outlets to buy whatever junk you're selling them at that low price. You're buying it for $4, you're selling it for $40. As more people get into that business, the price is going to come down due to increased supply.
Yeah.
So as long as you risk $1 and you have a reasonable expectation of making $3, statistically, it's pretty tough to go broke.
Mm.
Full stop. And so if you look at like Nicholas Taleb and some of these guys that are out there, I'll say more of I'll call it the highbrow trading, not the realm that I was in, like the internet traders.
Yeah.
That's basically what they do. So they allocate a certain amount of money and they push that across a bunch of different symbols. And you know what? They don't need to pick. They're just in so many things, and those trades are designed to have a small risk but a high potential reward.
Yeah.
And of course, that applies into business. And so my transition was realizing, holy crap, if I'm going to make money, I got to keep selling stuff, which I didn't like because 98% of people don't do anything with it. That's a shock. That's the way the stats are. I mean, I've seen some people that are 95. The best I've ever seen was 90%. But even if you have a failure rate of 90%, that's not a good number. That's actually why I got out of the information business. But anyway, so no matter what business you're in, if you can design it so that you can diversify your opportunities, and you've got that $1 of risk, but $3 potential reward. And of course, it's gross reward. You got taxes and overhead.
Yeah.
But as long as that gross amount is 3 to 1, statistically, it's going to be really tough for you to go broke. Now, of course, the magic is in figuring that out. And that's where the story eventually leads into the digital realm, because that was, man, when I saw Facebook's first platform, it was much different than it is today. They actually exposed to me your Facebook timeline and 3 levels deep. So your friend, their friend, and their friend. I could actually get the words you were putting onto Facebook, which of course, we had, semantic indexers and whatnot that we applied to that, and we could, ferret out your language. But just really simply, the way that I figured it out was, again, thinking about trends. Let's talk about a micro trend. Somebody's going to get married. You know what the trend of their life is going to be from engagement to wedding day, right?
Yeah.
Well, again, your perspective is relative to your observation point. Well, if I was observing their life, that marriage would be the small slice. But if I zoom in, it's like this major event. And obviously anybody who's been married knows that's a big deal to a woman, especially. The dudes are like, okay, whatever. When's the bachelor party and when's this over and when do we get to get into bed, right? That's kind of how it goes. So when I looked at it, again, taking the perspective of, let me change my observation point, we designed a system where we could get a referral passed along about 80% of the time. Right. So again, I always back into, how do I maximize my effectiveness? I've got to have the right observation point and I've got to have the right trend. Full stop. So if I know somebody's going to get married at some point, and I know they're going to need a photographer and a place and a dress and all that, how do I influence their purchase decision? The brute force way is to advertise to them. The more nuanced way to do it, again, this is way back in the beginning, is I go to their 3 layers and tell them, hey, if you know somebody that's going to get married, I know a photographer that will give them a free photo shoot to decide if they want to use them. That's what everybody wants, right? So that the woman who's getting married has friends. Those friends want to help her. When that friend sees a coupon like that, they're going to tell her about it. I mean, it's not even a question.
Yeah.
And so again, you've got to change the way you think mostly. But when you make those small shifts of, thinking about, okay, let me shift my observation point. How are things really, not how do I want them to be? That's when these opportunities open up. But, again, it feeds all the way back into my childhood and physics and, trading the markets and being, because trust me, when you're in the market, you have real dollars on the line. Like, there's no room for opinion. In fact, that's where I got my kind of my hard shell when it comes to opinions. Like, I could care less what somebody's opinions are. I generally don't listen to them. What I start listening for is, okay, where do they spend money? So if somebody tells me, oh, hey, if you change the color on your webpage, you're going to get a conversion improvement. Okay, how much money did you spend on that test over how many iterations? Oh, well, I saw it on a blog somewhere, or the digital marketer guys told me. Okay, get out of here with that. So it's when you start combining a lot of these concepts is where you can get into the practical application. How do I actually pick a trend? Which I'm revealing a lot here, by the way. But really the magic is in understanding that there are trends that evolve over a 5-minute time frame in trading. Like, to me, that's a trend. There's a trend that goes over an hour, 4 hours. And in life, it's a wedding. It's, my kid is just about to go from kindergarten into grade school, and then grade school into middle school, then middle school into high school. Like, there are transition points. Yeah. And so what you begin to understand, again, from a trading standpoint, there are always inflection points. Stocks, options, futures, prices never move without an inflection point. Same thing applies in business. So, in America, we've got inflection points like left and right? We just had like our capital storm since the last time you guys did it. And in fact, you guys burned it to the ground the last time it happened. That's an inflection point. If you go into the markets, you can see price moving. If you go into the business world, you can see people making decisions on where to spend their money based on that inflection point. So, again, I don't care necessarily, where the politics lie. I just say, okay, there's an inflection point. How then can I go in and capitalize on that? Now, here's the rub in seeing things the way they really are. It doesn't last, right? So sort of the long-term thing in the adjustment we have to make in business is, you may have a product that's riding on a trend that's got a 3-year lifespan. But if your belief is, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the next Apple, I'm going to be the next Amazon, without realizing like Apple and Amazon have reinvented themselves like 57 times over those years, but you're not thinking that way. Your perspective is, oh, it's just Apple, like this monolithic thing over time. You're missing that part of what makes those organizations so huge and monolithic is that they were able to bottle up what I'm describing. Now,
But it's all about, so Amazon started with Amazon Books or
right,
Amazon.com. Apple started with laptop or with desktops.
right.
They all start in a niche or in a smaller. It's only when they get bigger do they then branch into Apple, into software, into hardware,
Yep.
into iPhones and whatever, and Amazon go into everything. So
Well, Mark, and they have to do it. That's the thing.
yes.
But
They've got profits. They've got projections and forecasts that they need to reach, so they have to move out to the next thing.
Well, hold on. Let's. I want to make things eminently practical for people. It's not just projections. Let's look at Steve Jobs getting fired.
Yeah.
He needed to get fired. He was trying to shove down America's throat a computer they didn't want. It was only when America got the internet and they had a reason to own that computer that you could sell 1 million units in the time frame he wanted.
Yeah.
If you look at the iPod, if you look at the iPhone, that the technology for the iPhone was already there. It was in Japan.
Yeah.
Japan had it forever, but you had increased cellular reach. You had AT&T and Verizon selling through. You had more people with more devices. It had become more of a tool, not a convenience. People forget you used to have to pay for literally every minute of cell phone time.
Yeah.
My friends hated me because the incoming minute was free. And so I would literally sit there like this, talking on the phone. And I would tell people at 50 seconds, hey, we got 10 seconds. Why? Because my first minute is free. At 59 seconds, end. Now, then I learned, so Verizon actually, or back then it was AirTouch, they figured out that people were doing that. So there was very nearly a lawsuit about this. They didn't disconnect the call when you press the end. They disconnected the call when their computers registered, which was about 2 seconds later.
Right.
Which PS, you went over the minute and they bill in full minute increments.
Right.
So again, I like to figure out how stuff works out. So anyway, they not only do it because they have projections, but it's because the businesses start to fail. That's the key thing.
Okay.
So why do they come up with projections? They come up with the projections because when they're working on the old projections, they get in the boardroom and they're like, hey guys, if we don't figure this out, we're going to be out of business. So it's important that we don't, again, change our perspective. Yes, the projections are important, but the flashpoint or the impetus is they will die as a business. IBM learned this the hard way, that when IBM was like the computer company, and then things diversified and they got lazy or whatever you want to call it. They lost $1 billion, which back then was like an unheard of amount of money. But they did that because they didn't believe their projections. They thought they were going to be the king of the hill forever, and they didn't pivot. They didn't acquire things. They weren't, utilizing their patent portfolio. Again, however you want to describe it, they weren't able to see things for the way that they were. And again, some of this I didn't get from the markets, but when you're listening to people talk about this and you see price, and my brain at least was starting to put a lot of this together, so this developed over the years, and then I would test it, right? So the stock market or anything with the markets will give you a way to test it. And so then I, in a true scientific fashion, would come up with a theory and say, okay, if I need a flashpoint, how do I get one of those, so around earnings announcements and things like that. And so what I'm describing to you is all stuff that I tested with real money in live markets. And so I had to have something that was definable, repeatable, like a real scientific experiment, and something that I could then, go give to somebody else and see their result, which again was a byproduct of teaching my methodology to other people, which I can say that everybody that used it was very successful with it. And I mean that 100% of the people with it were profitable.
So let's move on to social media. So you, again, early stage in 2005, So tell me about what social media marketing. Um, what was it? What was it like pre-Facebook? I suppose let's sort of call that as a milestone, because everything
Oh
did
man.
change. Everything massively changed when Facebook started to go out to the rest of the world. So we were saying like 2005 there was Twitter, but you were saying that Twitter wasn't really a notification sort of, people didn't tweet so much. So what sort of environment, and why did you think that you should go into social media at such an early stage?
Oh, unfortunately, there is a little bit of right place, right time, right? So just like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, pick your poison. Larry Ellison, most of what we miss about these quote unquote big names is a part of what we're looking at is right place, right time. And so fortunately, I had already been exposed to direct response marketing when I got out of the military. I love how we're doing lots of flashbacks and flash forwards.
Yes,
This
yes.
would make a horrible movie, by the way, but hopefully it's a good conversation.
Yeah.
So I got out of the military, of course, college student. I was, like bodybuilding. I was doing a lot of things that didn't quite match up. So I was bodybuilding, working at Circuit City because I wanted, which of course is now defunct, but I wanted to develop a business. I wanted to start a business for customer support
Wow.
because I was into computers, but most people weren't, and they just didn't know how to use them, and all of the support really sucked. So my first mistake was not understanding that people in India and the Philippines could do that. And so even in the early 90s, companies were outsourcing their support. And so I got crushed very early in that business by, much lower service providers, I'll put it that way. So as I'm licking my wounds, my dad, he walks in, because like all good college students, I'm living at home, has this huge 3-ring binder, throws it at me and says, "Hey, maybe you can make some money with this." And so my dad had a huge real estate empire that was just crushed by the Internal Revenue Service. They changed the rules, ex post facto, I might add. So in retrospect, and literally ruined him overnight. And so he turned into this perennial business opportunity buyer. Part of the book was on part of the binder rather was a book called Scientific Advertising. That's the backstory. Fast forward all the way to the internet and trackability. The problem with direct response marketing, if you're doing it in envelope, is it's hard to track unless somebody self-reports. So a coupon code or something like that. I knew with the computer that I could force it, right? Because I could put something in the URL. And I also understood very viscerally that nobody stumbles on anything online. Like it's not like you're seeing a billboard, right? You have to click, you have to direct. And so for me, it was a way to test a lot of my theories that I'd refined over the years, developed in the markets, and I could test it with real money. So I didn't have to argue with somebody whether or not I needed a big picture of my face in an ad. I could tell you whether or not that big picture of my face in an ad worked. And so again, it was like that part of my personality could rule the day, and I could literally like rub people's faces in it. And I don't want to underemphasize that. That was a big part of my motivation, was being able to tell people exactly why they were wrong and really rub their face in it. Well, because I could show my bank account. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you could not like me all you want, but right? So unfortunately, self-awareness is part of it. So, I kind of explain that and give it as a disclaimer now. So when Facebook launched their ad platform, when Google launched its ad platform, I'd already been, Overture and whatnot, like some of the early pay-per-click engines I'd been involved with. I will say, and I'll say this always, I hate Google. I'm always black hat. They are just a company like Joe's Pizza or Paul's Plumbing. They're not the government. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't care what their policies are. They don't care if I succeed or not, which is the important distinction for me. And by the way, I've seen, the Google guys ruin people's businesses. So I definitely had a chip on my shoulder when it came to that.
Had you tried Google Ads and
oh my gosh, yeah.
And they haven't worked, or
it's not that they didn't work. It's that, so my experience from the stock market, and I was actually what's called a market maker, that's overstating it a little bit. What I saw from the inside of the stock market was they can put the price wherever they want. They have a little button which says, okay, I want a spread, so you can buy at $1 and you can sell at $1.50. And if things get crazy, well, you can buy it $1, or you can sell it $1, but you have to buy it at $5, right? If I don't know where price is going to go, they widen the spread, is what it's called.
Mm.
Well, so my natural assumption is Google's going to do that. So if they see that, like, let's say I'm in an industry where they know I'm going to pay $50 per click, do you really think they're going to charge me $1? Come on, we're not that naive.
But early doors though, Google ads were like now. So I use Google ads for my podcast course. I train people, and for me it's a great platform because everyone goes to Google, and people, if they're looking to do a podcast course, they are looking for it. And that's why I decided not to use Facebook ads, because Facebook ads is just a projector, like you just get it thrown up in front of you, and if you're flicking, you're not really, maybe not paying too much attention to it. Where if you're looking for a course, you're going on to Google and you're looking for a course. So and early stages, Google ads, like now they are relatively expensive, but early stages they were relatively cheap. They're the same sort of price that Facebook ads are now.
Well, they were. So it's I didn't mean to say that, you know, that it was a possibility in my mind, right? And so it that drove me to understand more about the customer. That, I think that's a better point to make.
Okay.
And so my early testing was Google was a really bad place to get people for trading courses. The best that I could tell is because they expected it to be free. Now, if I sold to them in the mail at some point, so I could get them off of, if I got them off of Google, it was good for me. That's my main point. If I could get them off of the internet, it was good for me. So a lot of the stuff that I would do, you know, events and physical mail. So that's a good place to kind of go to, just as a quick kind of culmination of everything.
Sure.
At the end of the day, we're talking about people, right? And so the problem marketers have is they start to reference people like their numbers. And so you have to understand what somebody is doing, what their user experience is, absolutely, but you also have to understand what their mentality is, right? This goes back to whether it's trading or not. It all comes back to their mentality. So if somebody is looking to do something brand new, they're probably going to go to Google, YouTube, something like that. If somebody is, looking to spend some time, they're going to go onto Facebook. It's just in direct response terms, it's a different conversation in their mind. And so the core tenet of direct response marketing copywriting is enter the conversation in somebody's mind. So the way to test if you've done that is to go onto a platform like Google or Facebook, but do it with the intention that I've just described. So if we know somebody's got their phone, they're just flicking through Facebook, their news feed, then your choices are going to reflect that, right? So that means you've got to have eye-catching movement, diagonal lines. And I'll just do a rapid fire list so somebody can pause and write these down. So movement is how our brains are trained, right? So something moving left to right, especially diagonal lines. So if somebody's moving something up, a diagonal line will cause their eyes to do to move along them. Yeah. High contrast colors, those are really the top three. You can test other stuff, but they're all junk. So that would be a video with a really fast move, or like a flash of light, or something that's radically different from what's in their timeline. With Google, it's definitely benefit oriented, but oriented to their keywords. So if you've got to look at what does their keywords say about what they're looking for? Is it a how-to? Is it a what? Yeah. Or is it just like podcast, right? Because podcast would be a useless term, I would think. I mean, I wouldn't bid on it. Although if I had a lot of money, maybe I would. So
the interesting thing is podcasts actually, the Google effect on podcasts is now a growing thing. I was on a podcast movement, which is one of the sort of American companies that do events, and they were doing a virtual one last year, and searching on Google for podcasts is now a major factor. It was never really that major factor, but now this is why they're sort of talking about having podcasts, having pages for every podcast, because people are now searching for things like podcasts, which I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago wasn't a thing. Word of mouth and sort of finding on iTunes was kind of the way that people found it. But now Google is sort of impacting into the podcast world as well. So I suppose my point is, these things are all fluid, and yes, there's trends we can catch, but there's also there's also movement and pivots and changes, which sometimes are customer driven, sometimes corporate driven, and on those sorts of decisions for ads.
Oh, so it's I was being far too literal. So I wouldn't bid on just the word podcast. I would bid on something that was descriptive, and this is the beauty of podcasts. So the title like of this is going to come naturally from you. I'm sure it's going to be a beautiful description of what somebody's going to get by listening to this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That probably reflects what they're going to search in Google, but they're going to add the word podcast to their search term.
Yeah.
So if I were creating, it's like if I were going to advertise this episode, then I would want to know, okay, what's your title going to be? I'd probably re-listen to it and pick out a few key elements. I would think about, okay, who do I want to reach? And what are they kind of searching for? What's meaningful for them? Yeah, like we said pre-show, it's probably not trends, even though like we've really covered how you're going to grow 100 million or 200 million. If you want to grow a big business, like this is it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most people don't think it's it, right? So again, my perspective, I can't assume that people are going to want to learn about trends. They're probably going to want to learn, how do I make money in the next like 6 minutes, right? Yeah. And hopefully, how can I make money so that I can sit in my computer, press a button, and then you like hand deliver checks and bonbons. And
I can
just,
some people think that still exists or ever existed.
Yeah, right. So anyway, the beauty of Google is it is very good for that kind of discovery. But I'm saying like in the way I use it, it's very much oriented from my customer's perspective and what they want to accomplish, because that's usually the way they word things when they type something in. I mean, unless they're just looking for porn, which, back when Overture used to publish like the actual search terms, I literally saw the books. There were 3 volumes that were 4 inches thick of all of the pornography and sexual related terms, and literally one other binder of everything else. It was shocking to see. I mean, this is like the benefit of learning where things come from. So again, when I saw that, I thought, wow, the beauty of that is I don't need to test a lot of stuff. So I looked through the book, wrote down some things, and it distilled down into this. If you talk to somebody and you listen for how they describe a search, person to person, not clicky, you have all of the research you need. Write those phrases down, put it into Google, and see what you get. That's your competition. Now you need to think, how do I differentiate against them? Not necessarily like in a search term, because you can always buy that, right? You could buy an ad that gets to the top. Yes, you could SEO it to death. That's another show. But then how do you, when they're looking at that search result, that's your competition. What are they going to think? And are you regurgitating the words that they use, because their brain is designed to seek that stuff out? We literally have machinery in our brain that takes our beliefs. This is why self-awareness is so important. It takes our beliefs and cuts out everything else. You will literally manufacture memories around this phenomenon. People won't remember things properly. That's why, courtrooms and whatnot, testimony is so difficult. So this is why people aren't going to remember necessarily what we're saying. They're going to remember that we were animated and we were laughing. They're going to remember the emotional aspect, but they're not going to be able to regurgitate what I told them. So that's why you need to identify it from where they're coming from. This is why reading like the old books about copywriting are so important, because more so then than now, they were educated, what I call, on the street. They had to make money with what they were doing. Whereas today, with the rise of venture capital and whatnot, we have a lot of just stuff coming out of, nothing against the Y Combinator guys. And I know I'm looking at the clock too. But there are a lot of assumptions being made based on venture capital money, based on huge trends around the internet, around cell phones, and people saying why things work that just aren't true. Yes, people benefited, but when you're getting down to the cause, like a listener today, and the benchmark I use, my mom worked 3 jobs to keep us out of the ghetto. My benchmark for teaching something is it something that my mom could have taken in her part-time? Now, I'm not saying instantly, working hard, taking on a 4th job, but could she have used that to make even more money and, get us moving on up like the old Jeffersons? And so if you follow the advice of the venture capitalist, absolutely not. You are going to go broke, because what they miss is that their macro trends are so powerful, and the money is such an igniter and such an artificial increase to their success that they've lost all perspective. And so for us as regular entrepreneurs, we have to realize we don't have those luxuries. And so we had damn well better focus on the way things really are.
Mhm.
And so you've got to look at the people from like Rockefeller, Carnegie. Those are the guys that I listened to, because they had to build it from scratch. There wasn't anybody to explain it to them.
Mhm.
And so this is where I get a lot of it from. I'll go back to those eras to figure things out. And so, again, looking at it from your customer's perspective, you want that search engine result to say what they're saying, because their brain, really out of their own volition, like they're going to pay attention to it without even thinking about it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, I mean, I'm just giving like literally the holy grail to marketing. If you can put something in front of somebody
Yeah.
that their brain is predisposed to pay attention to,
Yeah.
it doesn't take a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then because the algorithms reward you for giving that attention, you're
Mhm.
going to have lower prices. Like I've got a YouTube campaign, I'm getting two penny views. I've got a 300% increase in viewership rate. Why? Well, because it speaks my customer's language, not
Yeah.
necessarily because I'm some genius. I'm just following basic principles, and I iterate and I let things grow over time.
Mhm. Mhm. All right, let's move on to your latest venture, which is in healthcare. So again, as I've discussed, it's a trend which is with the pandemic and with healthcare, with with care homes and all this sort of surrounding healthcare. So what initiated you to go into healthcare, and maybe tell me a little bit about your business as well.
Yeah, there's maybe a tearjerker warning coming up. So
Okay.
my dad first got sick, cancer. We got healthcare in the home. It was a train wreck. They hooked him up to machines, but they never told us how to use them. So that was a big mistake.
Mm.
He wound up getting into a trial that literally killed him. Fast forward a lot of years, my mom started having some strokes and needing home care. In fact, we moved to the home I'm in now, specifically to care for her. So we got people into the home. She wound up going into the healthcare system, and again, they did a procedure that led to her getting sick, and she died. And so what we don't know in America is the third leading cause of death is healthcare, and not just healthcare. Like I'm indicting the whole industry. It's mistakes. It's doctors that are on drugs. They're drunk. It's crazy. And again, it's not everybody. I know this is a touchy subject because we've got our healthcare workers out there as heroes, and I'm by no means taking away from them what they're doing. Again, I'm looking at the way things are,
Mm.
and in America, at least, there's a big problem in healthcare. I believe it's the result of what's called fee for service. Medicare and most third-party insurance companies in America will take a bucket of money and drop it on a hospital's desk when somebody comes in and they get a code for healthcare. So let's say you fall down, you break your hip, you need a hip replacement. There's a bunch of codes that are associated with that, and there's money that's associated with that. We're humans, and anytime you dump money on us, we want to keep as much of it as possible, right? So you can imagine that causes some corners to be cut. You know what I mean? Like you make decisions now based on money. And so out of all of that experience, I saw, look, we have a problem, and let's stop hoping the government's going to take care of it. And no matter what country you're in, Gandhi proved to us we don't need to rely on a government or some monolithic entity to do our work for us. Gandhi turned the tide of an entire nation by being the pivot point. So let's just say that no matter where you are, it's possible.
Mm.
And so we've got a huge problem by 2030 in America. 61 million baby boomers will need part-time or full-time care. If we think that this pandemic is going to overwhelm the hospitals, we have no clue what's coming down the pike. So it's a result of looking at the way things are
Yeah.
and seeing that there's a problem personally that caused me to even ask the question, hey, is there a problem? Because otherwise you're going to think, oh, somebody else will take care of it, or even, hey, they've got it handled. I got to tell you, they don't have it handled. Now they're on a good start. They changed in America to what's called a value-based care. And it's an improvement because now they're focused on the outcome. And that's such a huge shift. It's totally massive. Seriously, kudos to Center for Medicare. The government finally got something right. And so we at least have the thinking that's going to get us to where we need to go. Now I'm saying as an entrepreneur, I can come into that environment. I've got the trend, right? We've got 61 million people that are going to need some kind of care.
Yep.
Home health care has been around really since the early 90s. So it's not like I'm inventing anything. We just don't have a lot of time. And so my strategy isn't to start up a healthcare company. And so we take on investor money, we buy home healthcare companies, we make them more efficient, we give them better processes. We do have some super secret proprietary stuff that we do. We increase their average case from 3,500 to over 15,000. We can do it with very little capital expenditure. It's virtually overnight. It's all within Medicare guidelines, within third-party guidelines.
So am I right? You're buying up care homes and making them more efficient?
That's the first step. So that's step one. Step two is then making, one entity out of that. And then, so just like with Tesla, you start off with a $250,000 car that like 7 people in town are going to buy so that you can afford other stuff. So yeah, that's where we start. We increase efficiencies, increase profitability, increase cash flow because we want to pay our investors a huge return for the luxury of using their money. And then we want to create larger value by creating a system that's going to actually care for people. And so I do want to say, like, our second iteration is going to be where we're cannibalizing, that constant push to make more and more money in education, in sending people out to somebody's house, even if we're not coded for it. So if somebody comes into our system, my vision is down the road where, yes, we are going to get reimbursed for some of the medical care. But I like telling the story. It's actually a woman in Ohio, newly diagnosed type 2 diabetic. She went in, got her medication. Nobody told her what to do for her diet. She injected her insulin without eating first. She went into a coma. 911, another emergency home visit. It's like, guys, all you had to do was give her a pamphlet at the very least. What I'm saying is there's so much money involved. Let's stop trying to be bazillionaires for once and be like bazillionaire -2. I mean, not a lot, right? I'm not saying, okay, forego the 180-foot yacht and just buy the 90-foot yacht, right? So that's what we're talking about here. Don't buy 2 G5s. Let's just get 1 G5, you know what I mean? And borrow the other one. And instead of just giving her a pamphlet, let's send somebody out to her house. And not just somebody out to her house, let's send somebody out with food and say, hey, Susie, I bet you think it's really tough to make good tasting stuff for your new health concerns. Let me show you. Cook the woman a meal. Have her help cook a meal, and then follow up in a couple of weeks in person. And then in the meantime, get on the phone, telemedicine, which, by the way, you can get reimbursed for. So again, it's applying all of these entrepreneurial mindset things that we would do normally in a business and think about cross-selling and other things, but applying it to an industry that is like this closet, bomb that's waiting to go off.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things for older people who are in care homes or living on their own is loneliness. So,
oh my goodness, yeah.
So if you sent someone around even once every week or once every month, that would probably be a complete highlight for them, because one of the saddest thing is that loneliness is one of the biggest killers of elderly people.
Well, I use a lot of one-liners from movies. So Jerry Maguire at the very end of the movie, Cuba Gooding's, his character says, "You're not going to make me cry, Roy." And so I apologize if I do tear up a little bit, but my mom, even when she was here, would get lonely.
Yeah.
So, the guilt that I feel like that I didn't always go over there. It's like, I got something to do. It's like, now that she's gone, it's like, I think back and, those are the kind of things that I want to impact, because we're talking about real people here.
Yeah.
And yes, having somebody visit is going to help alleviate the loneliness. I mean, doing a FaceTime, just having somebody who, and I'm saying you don't even do it on a schedule. I'm saying as a company, we will do it on a random basis. It's like somebody will just pop over. Somebody's just going to say, hey, I wanted to FaceTime you, or get on a Zoom call. Connecting with people is so healthful. I mean, can I invent a new term? Johns Hopkins found that they could basically improve outcomes by 30% just by making somebody's environment better. I mean, I'm talking plants, better colors, let alone when you move into a house. When you take somebody out of a hospital and put them in the house, the outcomes just go off the charts as far as effectiveness, which translates into real dollars, right? So it's not like I'm not a granola crunching hippie to, give the far right guys, their due. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if you want to, as an insurance company or a captive healthcare program, we're able to return $9 to $12 in the first year, Mark. That's like, I can't even describe how earth-shattering that is. That's like 57 acquisitions and a stock price tripling overnight. In the second year, it goes to 12, and we're thinking it's probably going to be like stable around 12 to 15 for quite a while. Why? Because you're less people back in the hospital, fewer infections, better mental state, which we know improves leukocyte response, T cells, B cells. I mean, your internals improve when your mental state improves. You're smiling, you're laughing, you've got hope for the future. All of that is such a massive impact. So yeah, I'm more than a little bit passionate about it because we're going to make a ton of money, but my goodness, man, I mean, these are people who are literally going to die alone. I couldn't imagine, what my mom went through alone. Not going to make me cry, Roy.
All right, I'm going to have to stop there. I asked the same 6 questions of everyone that I ask on my podcast, so no different for you, Maceo. First question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Oh my goodness.
I told you they were a bit thought-provoking.
The best decision I made was going for special forces. It proved to me literally whatever I put my mind to, I can do it. The stuff I went through, most people won't have the good fortune of learning from.
Yeah. Okay. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
If you want to grow a big company, go get some investment. Stop trying to be the cool bootstrapper on YouTube. That's not you, and it's not going to happen.
Interesting. Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Solomon.
Why?
From straight out of the Bible. Because his stuff actually works. I got a guy onto the Dr. Oz show using stuff directly out of Proverbs.
Okay.
We made a lot of money off of that.
Okay. All right.
As one example.
Okay. Any regrets?
How much time do we have? Yeah. People talk about Jeff Bezos's regret minimization strategy. I'd like to know exactly how well he's doing at that. Yeah, most of my regrets, come from the personal stuff. It's like, is what I'm doing really worth the trade-offs? All the games I missed, and so part of that, does fuel me for sure. But yeah, it's all the mistakes that I made. Seeing the results of some of my decisions and rash behavior in the past.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for your honesty. What are you most proud of?
I am most proud of my kids. Man, to see those 2 young men out there in the world it makes all of my regrettable decisions somewhat livable.
How old are they now?
I've got 19 and 14, and then my daughter's 4.
Okay, fantastic. What does legacy mean to you?
Oh, at this stage of my life, everything. I think about it constantly. What are not just what are people going to think of me, which unfortunately I've got a large ego, so that's part of it. But it's also, it's like, what's going to be left? Like, and then how far is that going to go? People are forgotten so quickly. It's tragic.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Best place, MaceoJordan.com, which of course is spelled crazy weird. You can also search for Connexia.com and then get to MaceoJordan.com. But at my personal site is where people can actually get a form that will get to me. Only because I like to do stuff. I work with a lot of people for free. Entrepreneurs that are starting up. My only caveat is the second somebody stops actually doing stuff is when I cut them off. But if somebody wants to get in touch with me, not to have a great conversation or be mental masturbation, 100%. I will help you grow build a business, no problem. If that turns into money, that's secondary, partially because of those regrettable decisions I was just talking about. So it's an open invitation to exploit my guilt and regret.
Now we know the secret sauce for you, Maceo.
That's if you really get into it like that, that's a lot of what a lot of the bigger, like if you went to Warren Buffett or something like that, that's definitely, I've used that particular pressure point to my own advantage.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
It's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mark. I've loved every second of it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks.